On the day my father, Arnold Black Rhodes, died over a decade ago in Louisville, Kentucky, in that palliative care center in Baptist East Hospital, family and close friends huddled in that room until it was overflowing. We kept watch all through the day around his bedside. Who knows if he knew we were there or not? And we told stories, the tales that had grown taller over the years of family telling. We laughed until we cried, and we cried until we laughed. And we prayed, but most of all we sang, not from hymn books, but from memory. At times messing up the words we couldn't remember, and sometimes ad-libbing just to keep the tune going. But somewhere in our memory banks, even those of us who had been through dry periods of atheism and doubt, when one of us would forget, somebody else would remember, and so we sang him, My Father, out and over. And that old Appalachian tune described the scene. Oh, come, angel band, come and around me stand. Carry me away on your snowy wings to my immortal home. I guess you could say my father died a good death. Now, when skeptics about organized religion ask me why I care and why I'm committed to the church or to helping redeem religion as a force for good in this world, and let's just say the verdict is out about whether religion is a force for good in this world. But I may answer in various ways depending on the context. I might go back to the civil rights movement and out of my experience as a child marching in Louisville, Kentucky with my parents in civil rights marches, which I did. Or I might go to the moral commitment to equality for LGBT folks that some religious communities like this very church have fought so hard for. I might go back to the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, or I might talk about those women in Liberia, those Methodist and Muslim women who banded together to fight for peace there when there was so much civil war, when their children and all around them was in devastation. So I might go back to these, but in my mind and in my heart, when the skeptics rail, I always come back to the scene of my father's death, because in this moment, we had a repertoire of hymns with words and tunes interlaced with psalms and Bible passages, something that pointed us to the mystery of life, a power beyond ourselves that would save us in the here and now and even beyond death. They certainly saved us as our family in a time of great need. And for all the pundits, like conservative New York Times columnist Ross Douthat, who wrote recently, Can Liberal Christianity Be Saved? Assuming, of course, the answer is no. I say as long as there are hymn tunes and words and Bible passages rolling around in our hearts and in our minds, as was true here today and from our lips, this liberal religion thing is not over by a long shot. And we're going to take Ross. All right. So we're going to get back to that Ross Douthat shortly, but let's do a few more things before we get there. So what I discovered at my father's deathbed wasn't anything new. Our text from Exodus picks up the salvation story of the Hebrew people as they are making a transition from their lives as slaves to a new moment of creation and possibility in the promised land. They are on their way. And as you remember, the Israelites flee with Moses in the lead and Pharaoh's army on horseback in hot pursuit. Imagine this scene. What would it be like to be running as fast as you can? Grown men rendered powerless, grandmamas and crying babies and toddlers, with armed horsemen behind and with a wall of the Red Sea right in front of you. What a choice. Would you choose to die at the hand of the army, or would you walk into the wall of the sea? Which would you choose? hemmed in behind and before, no exit, no way out, which may, of course, be a state that all of us have experienced in our lives in one way or another. But you know the story, an angel of the Lord appears in a pillar of cloud, shielding the Israelites from the Egyptians. And as at the time of creation, the waters are divided and the dry land appears so the Israelites can walk through unharmed. It's a miracle. And at Moses' command, the seas return and swallow up Pharaoh's armies. Then, and here's where we want to focus, it says, Miriam, the prophetess, the sister of Aaron and Moses, took a timbrel in her hand, and all the women went out with timbrels and singing and dancing, and Miriam sang them a song of their rescue. Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and rider he's thrown into the sea. And I have to pause here to honor the question of a 9-year-old recently about this story, because she said, don't we love the Egyptians too? It sort of put me in mind of when she asked it of people rejoicing over Osama bin Laden's death. Are we really going to start rejoicing over people's deaths? But this is one of those uncomfortable places in the Bible. It's one of those biblical conundrums worthy of a sermon, but that's not where I'm going today. Because today I want to focus on Miriam. Now let's think about this a minute. What is strange about this picture? And rabbis have been asking Jewish congregations this a long time. What's strange about this picture? Imagine what it must have been like for the Israelites fleeing Egypt. What would go through your mind when packing for an escape and a wilderness wandering? What would you take with you on such a journey? How strange that Miriam and the women brought timbrels. Tambourine-like instruments. Hard to keep quiet during an escape and not exactly essential. And yet they brought them nonetheless. And having just survived death, the very first thing Miriam does is to play the timbrels and sing with thanksgiving to a God who had saved their very lives. And we must add that Miriam wasn't only a singer, she was a prophet, the one who had saved her people, already once by hiding the baby Moses, her brother, in the bulrushes to be discovered by Pharaoh's daughter. And that's, of course, how all of this gets started and played out anyway. But evidently the act of singing and dancing for the miracle that had just occurred, important for the prophet Miriam, it was important for her to do this as the very first thing to mark the moment. And so it was also, as we heard in the early Christian communities too. Singing and joy and celebration were an essential part of the ordering of the lives of early Christians. In Colossians we heard, and be thankful, let the word of Christ dwell in you richly. Teach and admonish one another in all wisdom, and sing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs with thanksgiving in your hearts to God. And singing and celebration and dancing is something we do today. It's not superfluous, but absolutely essential to our identity and aspirations for the future. Now, over 11 years ago, Auburn Seminary, my institution, founded a program for teenage leaders from around the world, Christians, Jews, and Muslims, from South Africa, from Northern Ireland, from the Middle East, and here in the U.S. And over a course of the year, they learned communication skills. How do you actually talk with somebody you've been taught to hate? How do you talk with the enemy? From a kid from a township in South Africa, it may be the first time they have lived in proximity to whites. For Zaki, an Israeli Jew, and Jad, a Palestinian, it may be the first time they've spoken to the enemy. And they learn about each other's religious traditions, and they reflect on how our religions can be resources for peace and not always waging war, and how as leaders and activists at home, they can make a difference in their communities. Now, each summer there's an immersion, and so we gather together, all of us together. They do very hard work, but they have fun too. And one of the highlights of the summer is when Ebony Gospel Choir comes to perform. Actually, maybe we're going to have this gospel choir come to perform. But it's an amazing experience to see teenagers from around the world listening in rapt attention. You know how hard it is for teenagers to listen in rapt attention? But I'm not kidding you. To a mostly older African-American gospel singing group. But they're not only listening, they're also responding, and with their own voices, and clapping. They do know how to clap, and feet, and on their feet, moving to the beat. And then together, up and down through the night. And over the years, Betty Forbes, the director of that choir, has curated a repertoire of gospel songs that are not so much focused on Christ and Jesus, but that actually speak to the aspirations and hopes of people across religious traditions. But the songs of Face to Face are not for celebration only, for what has been given. But they celebrate aspiration and commitment to a different kind of world. And in the course of the evening, the students may sing their own songs back to the Ebony Gospel Choir. When our students sing freedom songs from South Africa, from the anti-apartheid movement, we are marching in the light of God. Or when Israeli and Palestinian kids sing Shalom, Salam to each other, they are committing themselves to a different kind of future. They sing in hope for a world marked by human dignity, where difference is celebrated and all people matter, which of course is what happens here, but not everywhere. They are bringing in a world where abundance is shared and people have enough to eat and a place to lay their heads and actually dream in peace. With these words, these students are following the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. and Abraham Joshua Heschel, the great Jewish theologian, who marched hand in hand in the civil rights movement. And of marching for justice, Heschel said, "Our feet were praying," and I think we could do a little friendly amendment here and say, "Our feet were singing." Our feet were singing. Because ultimately, celebration in song without action for justice is somehow hollow, isn't it? It's hollow. Eventually, singing to express thanks to God who saves us motivates us to do God's work in healing and repairing the world. And so it is too with us when Adrian, one of your pastors, joined us at a park not far from here to deliver petitions to the Village Voice media to protest the adult section of Backpage.com that provides a platform sometimes for the sale of children for sex. Children who resemble our children, our grandchildren, little girls in pink sparkly sneakers. And our singing that day and our prayers, we're bringing in a world where children would not be exploited for sex anymore. I had the privilege of sitting at a coffee shop with Alyssa, a victim who'd been trafficked as a teenage girl and almost killed by her pimp. She escaped and has since finished college and is on her way to law school. She asked me what a seminary president does. I had to think about it, wondering, if she had ever heard of a seminary president. A lot of people, most people in the world, let's just face it, most people in the world don't know what a seminary is or what a seminary president might do. But I told her that we're equipping bold and resilient leaders, messengers of moral courage, who aren't afraid to stand up, to out the people who will sell children for sex. Now, she was amazed to hear this. It gladdened her heart. And she told me she didn't know that religious people would care. She had no idea that people were praying for her and others like her. And by the way, when I used the word progressive and religion, or justice and faith, together in the same sentence, she said she'd never heard those words put together before, that the people she hears, the religious people preaching on television, kind of give her the creeps. So she had never heard these words put together before. Now, I told you we'd get back to that Ross Douthat, the youngest regular op-ed columnist who writes for the Times, a religious conservative whose midsummer editorial, Can Liberal Christianity Be Saved?, got under the skin of supporters and detractors alike. He used the Episcopal Church as a case in point, but it could have been any mainline denomination. It could have been the Reformed Church of America. And he argues that the numerical decline in the church is caused by the Episcopal Church's progressivism and alignment with liberal causes. Did you get that? Quote, flexible to the point of indifference on dogma, friendly to sexual liberation in almost every form, willing to blend Christianity with other faiths, and eager to downplay theology entirely in favor of secular political causes. End of quotes. It sounds sort of familiar. We can't say everything we need to right here, but let me say there is no evidence to support Douthat's claim about progressivism leading to mainline decline. The first response I give is numerical, and it has to do with a recent Gallup poll that says that all of organized religion, as we've known it, is numerically declining. The conservatives actually are catching up with us. In 1973, the church, or organized religion, was the most highly rated institution in Gallup's Confidence in Institutions measure. That means that people had a lot of confidence in church back then. It's now at a low of 44%. Although the liberal church may be on the front edge of a trend, the conservative churches are catching up too. But this trend goes beyond organized religion. It goes into other kinds of institutions as well. Just look at the approval rating of U.S. Congress. That fell to a low of 11% at one point, a rating lower than porn, polygamy, the BP oil spill, and the U.S. going communist. So the decline of organized religion as we know it is a complicated brew of megatrends, including low birth rates, particularly low among mainline Christians and Reformed Jews, increasing mobility, and particularly for young people, for millennials, a distaste for churches and church people, religious people fighting among themselves. But don't lose heart. What Douthat doesn't see from his perch at the New York Times is what is happening at the grassroots level. Vibrant communities springing up all over the place in very new ways. Entrepreneurial communities, spiritual communities where none existed before. He doesn't know about Quest, which is a group in Seattle, Washington, a Christian community whose pastor, Eugene Cho, has led his church in generosity by his own family's effort. Eugene and his family saved 1 year's salary, that was $68,000, with which they started a ministry called One Day's Wages to take on a little thing like world poverty. What Douthat doesn't know about is another community in Denver called After Hours, a faith and action community to serve the poor and unchurched in Metro Denver. It says on their website, this is pretty cool, we gather in bars. Beer coasters are the main way of advertising the community. We try to live our lives as Jesus lived his. We're in the city parks with the hungry and the forgotten. We hand out food, water, socks, and communion. We are church for people that don't do church. The minister is a former bartender, a mall Santa, and a certified sommelier, a jack of all trades, you could say. He left the church for a time, but he came back to found this community. He's referred to as the chief love monger and the lead spiritual entrepreneur. And the Catholic Church is seeing changes too. There are thousands of Catholic house churches all over this country. Many of them are led by women priests. And perhaps you heard about the nuns on the bus who took to the streets. Okay. There's no way this church would not know about nuns on the bus. So from where I sit at Auburn Seminary, an almost 200-year-old institution, is that there is a counter-narrative to the one of decline that Duthat presumes. He is looking at things from a numerical perspective through his lens of conservative ideology, and what he doesn't seem to know is about the success of existing and emerging faith communities all across this country, and the fact that they marry piety, prayer, and spiritual practice with justice, with action, with being out there on the move, as this church does in such a brilliant way. Everywhere I go across the country when I speak, I often talk about Middle Church. I talk about you. I talk about you because for me, you are one of the special places that is so faithful and fearless and doing this work on the front lines. So I want to thank you. There's one assignment that you can do to be part of this great awakening of the Spirit and justice that is afoot. And I'm going to give you a hint. It's a lost art, sort of like writing letters. Does anybody here ever write letters anymore? Oh, okay, maybe not so lost. But you can do it. This assignment on the subway is particularly great to do at the beginning of a church year. And what I'm recommending is this. Commit a hymn or a Bible passage to memory. And it's not fair to pick one that you already know. Find one that makes you cry or makes you think or both. In one of these hymn books or on your iPad at home, or ask one of these great musicians around here to help you to play a tune if you don't know how to play it for yourself. And when you have committed your hymn to memory, sing your song in the shower. We all sound better there. We don't all sound like this choir. Hum it when you make dinner. Sing it to your children as you put them to bed. In this way, you will be prepared before surgery, or when you're waiting anxiously for a teenager to come home at night when that child is going to miss a curfew. Or come November when work gets particularly grueling and summer is just a distant memory. Sing it at the deathbed of a loved one, as we did in my family. It may just save your life. Sing it when you need its inspiration to do the right thing, to be more courageous, to create a more just world. Sing your song like you mean it, in thanksgiving for a God who loves us without limitation, a God who can make a way out of no way. As long as we have hymn tunes and words and Bible verses rumbling around in our hearts and in our heads and out through our feet, this thing called liberal Christianity is not over yet. Now, my hymn is this, and I had tipped Adrian off. How can I keep from singing? That was mine. And thank you, choir, for singing it so beautifully. It's variously attributed to Robert Lowry around 1869 and may have roots in the Quaker tradition, and it was picked up by Pete Seeger, who made it popular in the 60s, and then by Enya in the 1990s. This song has been rumbling around with people for a very long time. Our lives flow on in endless song above earth's lamentations. We hear the clear, though far off hymn that hails a new creation. No storm can shake our inmost calm, while to that rock we're clinging, since love is Lord of heaven and earth. How can we keep from singing? Amen.